Every country in the world has a history of hand-to-hand combat, but some take it more seriously than others. Let's take a look at the top 10 countries in the fight game. Given that Ukraine has only existed independently in the modern age since 1991, in historical terms, its influence on the world of boxing has exploded from nowhere. And that influence has had a particular quality: complete dominance. Their first step onto the world stage came from the size 15s of Vladimir Klitschko, who won super heavyweight boxing gold at the '96 Olympics in Atlanta. It was the first boxing medal ever won by an independent Ukraine. His big brother Vitaly went one better. In 1999, when he won the WBO heavyweight title and became the first Ukrainian heavyweight champion in history. A year later, Vladimir caught up, winning the WBO belt his brother had just lost. Vitaly picked up the WBC. Vladimir picked up the rest. And the two brothers ruled the heavyweight division for a decade. Just as their reign was coming to an end, the next generation of Ukrainian fighters were arriving, their efforts masterminded by Anatoly Lomachenko. As the boxing coach of the 2012 Ukrainian Olympic team, Anatoly led his charges to 5 medals, including 2 gold. Those 2 gold medals were won by Anatoly's son Vasily and his good buddy, Alexander Usyk. Vasily went on to become the fastest male 3-division champion in history and consensus pound-for-pound #1. Usyk would claim the WBO cruiserweight title in only his 10th fight and the undisputed title 5 fights later. Still a young country, Ukraine has yet to make a dent in the world of MMA. But if their boxing history is anything to go by, when they do, they will take a title and hold it for a long time. For a famously polite country, Canada sure has produced some exceptional and violent people, and some exceptionally violent people. Their contribution to boxing was first felt in the early 1900s, when Tommy Burns became the shortest heavyweight champ in history. The opposite of a nice guy champ, the legendary Arturo Gatti hailed from the land of maple syrup, as did Jean Pascal, David Lemieux, Bermane Stiverne, and Adonis Stevenson. All are championship names in the history of boxing, but none are on the level of Canada's gold medal winning flag bearer at the 1988 Olympics, Lennox Lewis. Although born in London to Jamaican parents, Lewis spent his high school years in Ontario and went on to represent his adopted country at both the '84 and '88 Olympics. His professional career positioned him as one of the greatest heavyweight boxers in history, as he won belt after belt on his way to becoming the last man to hold the undisputed heavyweight title. But Canadians have also managed to make a lasting impression on the world of MMA. Their most famous export is, of course, Québécois Georges St-Pierre, arguably the most famous personality of the formative years of the UFC and one of the best to ever do it. It was St-Pierre's impeccable fight IQ and magnetic personality that turned the northern North Americans into a hotbed of MMA fandom. So enamored are Canadians with the sport that they made George's UFC 129 headline into the biggest UFC event in history at the time. TriStar, the gym George calls home, has been instrumental in turning out more Canadian fighters to follow in GSP's footsteps and helped to make Rory MacDonald a Bellator champion. With one of the greatest heavyweight boxers and most famous UFC fighters in history laying out the path to success for their nation's young warriors, the future of Canadian fighters couldn't look brighter. For an island of just over 11 million people, our number 8 Cuba punches well above its weight in combat, especially when you consider that Cuba abolished professional sports back in the 60s. Before then, the small Caribbean country was a boxing force, with champs like Kid Gavilan Gonzalez, Eligio Sardinas, and Benny Paret claiming world titles at home and abroad. But even after the revolution, the country's now amateur boxers continued to dominate, and the best place for an amateur to dominate is the Olympics. Cuba's pugilistic record at the Games is quite simply astonishing. 37 gold medals with another 36 bronze and silver makes for a total of 73, the second best boxing medal tally behind only the United States, a country with almost 30 times the population. And Cuban women still haven't competed. The best of Cuba's Olympic boxers is the legendary three-time gold medalist, Teófilo Stevenson, a man thought to be so good that he could have been a five-time champ had Cuba not boycotted 2 games during his tenure. In more recent times, we can see how good the Cubans could be as pros via defectors like the heavyweight boogeyman Luis Ortiz and the 2-time gold medalist and super bantamweight champ Guillermo Rigondeaux. But to say Cuba is just a nation of boxers is crazy. By their own Olympic medal count, boxing is the #1 sport, but wrestling is their 3rd most successful discipline. And that's just one place above judo, and only by gold medals. Otherwise, total medals would put judo above wrestling. And with wrestling champs like the 3-time Olympic gold medalist and 5-time world champ Miguel Lopez, judokos like the dual Olympic gold medalist Idalis Ortiz, and all of their boxing heritage, we're finally seeing some of that talent force its way into MMA. Yoel Romero, the Olympic silver medal winning wrestler and 2-time UFC middleweight title challenger, is what happens when all of that history gets condensed into one seemingly superhuman specimen. And if Cuba keeps producing fighters like him, heaven help the world if they ever go pro. Muay Thai. It's the first thing any fight fan thinks of when discussing Thailand, and by itself would be enough to earn the Southeast Asian kingdom a place on our list. The national system of kickboxing has become an essential aspect of any MMA training, providing the last word on clinch control, knees, and elbow strikes. With the possible exception of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, no other fighting style so synonymous with a single country has had as great an effect on modern combat sports. But Muay Thai isn't the only contribution Thailand has made to combat. Former Muay Thai fighter and businessman Chetri Sichadong has shaken up the world of fight sports by using the promotion he started, One Championship, to promote his country's achievements to the world. Through the One Super Series, they have brought national attention to fighters like Yodsanklai Fairtex, Nongo Gayanghadao, Pechdam Pechi Indi Academy, and Sakatao Petpayatai, who have been legendary names in gyms for years. And like Stamp Fairtex, who has become the first dual kickboxing and Muay Thai world champion in One Championship history. But it isn't just kickboxing. Thailand has proven it can produce the best in Western boxing as well, with champions like Srisaket Sor Rungvisai and little-known WBC champion Wanheng Menayoten, who has the best undefeated record in boxing history. MMA is still fairly young in the country, but former One Strawweight champion Dejamrong Sor Amnoy Sirachok has proven that Muay Thai champions can make the transition to MMA as well. With a set of striking techniques unmatched by any other style in the world and underrated fighters of world-class quality, Thailand is unquestionably one of the world's greatest combat countries and only getting stronger. It's impossible to make a list of the top fighting nations without mentioning our number 6, Japan. And not just because that's where ninjas and samurai come from. In fact, the mighty UFC, who champion mixed martial arts across the globe, would never have achieved its foothold in popular culture if it wasn't for the Japanese tournaments held by the likes of Pride. From those promotions came MMA legends like Shinya Aoki, the Gracie Killers Sakuraba, and the Fireball Kid Takanori Gomi, as well as modern champs like Yoshitaka Naito and the simultaneous promotion champ Kyoji Horiguchi. In terms of striking, Japan loves it. Whether it's boxing, kickboxing, or karate, there's rarely a striking discipline on the planet that doesn't have at least one world title held by a Japanese superstar. In particular, Japanese boxing has given rise to several superstars like Fighting Harada, and more recently, the monster, Naoya Inoue. In the kickboxing, it's hard to go past the excitement machine Tenshin Nasukawa. Even the biggest name in boxing, Floyd Mayweather, couldn't go past the prodigy, and the two took to the ring in an exhibition boxing match for, well, they don't call Floyd money for nothing. In terms of grappling, jiu-jitsu originates in Japan and was a combination of multiple martial arts for close quarter combat on the battlefield. From jiu-jitsu came judo, which emphasizes throws and joint locks to subdue an opponent. Today, it's an Olympic sport that Japan still dominates. Without jiu-jitsu and judo, we wouldn't have Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and BJJ changed the face of MMA. That's Japanese grappling without even mentioning the country's standing as the second best active nation in Olympic wrestling. And oh yeah, that little and completely awesome thing known as sumo. Japan love their wrestling, all right. Almost as much as they love their fighting. Nearly 3 decades ago, the UFC revolutionized the world of combat sports, and the origins of that upheaval can be traced directly back to Brazilian Vale Tudo. Their anything goes format was brought to America by the famous Gracie family and packaged as the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It is no surprise that one of the Gracies, Royce, went on to win that first tournament.
This happened back in Brazil. I mean, not in a big event like this, but we grew up on that in the fighting business. But what happens in Brazil, people don't know in the world. And without the TV, back in Brazil, it was just, okay, it's personal. You do your style, I do my style, let's see who's the best. Let's do a personal battle.
The side benefit of the UFC's success was to popularize the Gracie family's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the world, and fighters began to utilize arm bars, rear naked chokes, and triangles as often as knockouts to win fights. Brazil also developed its own national styles of kickboxing and wrestling, known as luta livre, not to mention the completely Brazilian style of dance fighting, known as capoeira. The depth of these MMA roots has led to an entire generation of Brazilian champions in the sport, including historical icons like Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo, Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida, Demian Maia, and Vitor Belfort, to name just a few. Modern champions like Fabrício Verdun, Chris Cyborg, and Amanda Nunes have proven that Brazilian champions aren't going anywhere. For all their success in other styles, Brazil is strangely underrepresented in the sport of boxing. But Robson Conceição has recently won Brazil's first gold medal in Olympic boxing and is looking to become only their 5th world champion ever.
I have had some very hard times in my career as an Olympic boxer, so I'm ready to do whatever they ask of me in order to be a champion.
Whether he succeeds in making his country's name in boxing or not, the legacy of BJJ and the UFC alone ensure that Brazil will go down in history as a true giant of fight sports. No one is sure who invented boxing, but there is no doubt that the historically violent nation of the United Kingdom is responsible for the modern sport we all know. Everything from 3-minute rounds and weight classes to the size of the ring can be traced back to the 12 rules originally laid down by John Chambers in the Marquess of Queensberry's rules in 1867. And the British Isles have been pumping out pugilistic champions ever since. From nonpareil Jack Dempsey becoming middleweight champion in 1884 through to Tyson Fury today, UK fighters have consistently featured at the top of the divisional lists for well over a century and accounted for the 3rd most lineal champions in history. World beaters like Prince Nassim, Ricky Hatton, Joe Calzaghe, and Frank Bruno all made their name in their home country before venturing to America to prove themselves and become household names in the process. And every time they did, the Americans employed the same rhetoric.
When you had the Revolutionary War, we beat them in 1776. And so England again, through fisticuffs, have declared war on the ilk of Frank Bruno against America, Mike Tyson. We will beat them again in 1996.
It's absolutely a massive fight, and I will make sure that I rent a white horse and put my gear on You can just start calling me Paul Revere. The British are coming, the British are coming. I know y'all gonna invade us, but the problem is that I will make sure that I hold the line up.
The British also came for MMA titles, though with more limited success. Despite giving the world notable brawlers like Dan Hardy and Jimmy Manuwa, it took the unlikely workhorse Michael Bisping to finally win the UK's first UFC title.
Of course, I've been involved with this sport for a long time, and I've always been proud to represent England and Manchester on the world stage. I've got the belt here. I'm the world champion, my first ever title defense in Manchester at the Manchester Arena. It sounds cliche, but it really is what dreams are made of.
There are many styles in boxing, but Mexican boxing is the scariest, because anyone who is facing a boxer described as having a Mexican style knows they are going to get hurt. As ESPN boxing broadcaster Bernardo Osuna describes it, he's willing to bleed to score a victory. He's willing to get up off the canvas to score a victory. The Mexican fighter is willing to go that far in order to come away with the victory. This is exactly how the first Mexican heavyweight champion in history, Andy Ruiz Jr., upset Anthony Joshua to claim the title.
That was my first time in the canvas. And when I was in the canvas, I was like, whoa, what the hell just happened? But I had to get him back, you know? I had to get him back. I think that's when the Mexican blood in me and the Mexican warrior that I have, I had to return the favor.
It's a style that has produced some of the greatest names in the sport's history. Out-and-out legends like the 107 6-2 three-division champion, Julio Cesar Chavez. The 54 7-1 four-division champion, Juan Manuel Marquez. And the biggest name in boxing today, who has over 50 wins, titles in 3 divisions, and the biggest telecast deal in history.
We have to organize the best fights for the fans, and the most important for Mexican fans. I think Mexican boxing. I've always said that it is the best boxing in the world.
And Mexican MMA is no slouch either. The UFC has crowned 3 champions who claim roots from the southernmost section of North America. UFC commentator and
undisputed UFC bantamweight champion of the world, Dominick Cruz.
Heavyweight destroyer Cain Velasquez. And dual division legacy killer and Olympic gold medal wrestler Henry Cejudo. At the peak of their careers, all 3 were considered one-of-a-kind greats for their creativity and dominance. And with the love Mexican fans show for their national warriors, it's hard to imagine Mexico's place in the world of combat shrinking anytime soon. Through both its Soviet years and in the decades afterwards, Russia has left an indelible mark on the world of hand-to-hand violence, both at an Olympic level and at the highest echelons of hurt. Like Cuba, the lack of professional sport in the socialist system created an explicit focus on amateur sports, which manifested in an avalanche of gold medals at the Olympic Games, especially in wrestling. The Soviet Union as a whole still dominates the wrestling gold medal tally, despite not competing at the Olympics since 1988. Independent Russia appears 4th, and the unified team that Russians competed as in 1992 once the USSR collapsed is 12th. Taken together, their medal tally is insurmountable. Their Olympic boxing and judo records are also respectable, though not as much as their wrestling. But all of this ignores the particularly Russian invention that the motherland has always been #1 in: Sambo. Invented post-World War I in an attempt to combine the best techniques of every other martial art, Sambo was MMA before MMA, and its effectiveness fueled the success of Fedor Emelianenko, the greatest MMA heavyweight in history. Fedor is that particular type of Russian fighter, the superhuman monster. Others in this mold include wrestler Alexander Karelin, whose Greco-Roman wrestling record stands at an utterly ridiculous 887 wins and 2 losses. Sergei Crusher Kovalev, the 3-year unified light heavyweight champion. And who can forget the Russian mauling machine Khabib Nurmagomedov, who has brought his country's wrestling excellence to the UFC with terrifying efficiency. The Eagle has had unprecedented success at the highest level of mixed martial arts, and his career could represent the entirety of Russian combat in miniature. It should be obvious who the greatest fighting nation is. As we've seen, other countries may have developed ways of fighting and produced a few champions. But the place all of those champions go to compete? The United States of America. Either to the home of the UFC and boxing pay-per-view, Las Vegas.
I made a promise to myself when I was young that I wouldn't go to Vegas unless I fought there. And 30 years later, I'm finally getting the opportunity to fight there on the biggest platform in the world.
Or the Mecca of boxing, New York City's Madison Square Garden.
I want to say thank you, Madison. I feel this is my second home. I had a lot of fights, huge time, just amazing time, amazing atmosphere in Garden. I love it.
The biggest promoters, Top Rank, Mayweather, Al Heyman, the UFC, Golden Boy, are all American. The most champions in both boxing and MMA are American as well. In the UFC, the USA has had 68 champions. The second best is Brazil with 15. That's less than a quarter. Boxing is even crazier, with 211 individual lineal champions to second best Mexico's 34, about 1/6. In boxing, America has produced the highest paid boxer in history, the longest reigning champion, the youngest heavyweight champ. The list of bests is too long to make a dent in. The names that the U.S. has given fight sports history are like a limitless pantheon. In boxing alone, the land of the free has supplied Muhammad Ali, both Sugar Rays, Roy Jones Jr., Oscar De La Hoya, Joe Louis, George Foreman, Deontay, Floyd, Bernard, Claressa, Rocky, and so on. The MMA names are only limited by the relative youth of the sport. Think John Jones, Daniel Cormier, Demetrius Johnson, Ronda Rousey, Stipe Miocic, Tyrone Woodley, Randy Couture, Gina Carano, Miesha Tate, and Brock Lesnar. It's an absolute avalanche of celebrity, fueled by both that uniquely American pursuit of excellence and virtuosic publicity skills.
Let's go, champ!
America have done to fighting what they've done to so many other things. Absorbed it, adapted it, supercharged it, and then sold it back to the rest of the world bigger, better, and more expensive. When it comes to countries that have both succeeded in and shaped fighting, nowhere else comes close to our number one, the United States of America.
So bye, Miss American Pie. Oh, my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry.
Thanks for watching. And remember, if you want more fight sports in your life, just hit the subscribe button.